You know, they say in the NFL, when you miss on a quarterback in the draft, it sets your franchise back several years and it's hard to bounce back from. And the Carolina Panthers are learning that lesson the hard way with Bryce Young because when they traded up for Bryce Young, they thought this dude was going to be the answer to their long-term quarterback struggles. Ever since Cam Newton got cut by this franchise, they haven't had stability at the quarterback position. And they mortgaged a lot to trade up for Bryce Young. They gave up DJ Moore, 2 first-round picks, and also a couple of other second-rounders to go along with that. And Bryce Young, up to this point in his career, not only is he one of the biggest busts in NFL history, but he may be the worst quarterback ever drafted in the first round because he's worse than Jamarcus Russell. He has a 2-18 record as a starter. The dude struggles to get the offense past the 50-yard line. And for the Carolina Panthers, it looks like making the decision to draft Bryce Young has nuked this franchise. Not just right now, but in the future as well, because right now, Bryce Young is not a starting caliber quarterback. Hell, I don't even think he's good enough to be a serviceable backup on the majority of NFL teams. So you got a guy that not just is he not good enough to start, but he isn't even backup material. So that means that it's going to be hard to trade him and get some value out of him because most teams aren't going to view him as an asset that really is worth giving up any kind of draft picks for him, maybe a 6-7 rounder at best. So you're stuck in a situation where you got a guy on a rookie deal and he still has a few years left on it until you can cut him and not really have to worry about the financial implications that comes with that. Therefore, if you want to move on from Bryce Young after this season, you probably are going to have to cut him, take a little bit of dead cap, and then you're going to have to once again go back to the same stage that you were at before you took Bryce Young in 2023 because you once again are going to have to draft another quarterback potentially. And you're in a really bad situation right now because with how bad Bryce Young is, you need another quarterback unless you want to run it back with Andy Dalton. Next year's quarterback class is not good unless you like Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. You probably shouldn't draft a quarterback next year, but are you in a position to pass up on a quarterback? Because let's say Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward actually are generational quarterbacks. Is it worth passing up on one of those two guys when you already have PTSD from whiffing on the decision to draft Bryce Young? And here's another thing. Bryce Young has been so bad that when he's on the field, it makes it hard to evaluate how good the team around him is because he holds back the performance of the entire team. And although the Panthers have been a dumpster fire, Bryce Young, being a first overall pick, was expected to be able to overcome situations like this because nobody who gets drafted top 5 in the draft is going to a great situation. You are going to have to overcome some level of dysfunction to succeed. When Cam Newton got drafted first overall by the Panthers in 2011, that wasn't a great situation. But he was able to make the most of it and become the heart and soul of the Panthers franchise for the majority of years that he was the starter. Same thing with Joe Burrow. Everybody talks about how good the receivers are that Joe Burrow has been throwing to, but nobody has talked about how he's one of the only quarterbacks in the history of the NFL to make it to a Super Bowl with the offensive line that gave up the most sacks in the season and allowed him to get sacked 10 times in the playoff game, and yet he was still able to lead them to a win. Not everybody who gets drafted this high goes to a great situation. Andrew Luck, he carried the Colts all the years he was their starter, and they were never really that good. They never really had great offensive lines. They didn't have a stacked group of wide receivers outside of T.Y. Hilton. Andrew Luck didn't really have pretty much anybody at wide receiver who was that good. Bryce Young set this franchise back because now you're scared to want to take the risk and roll the dice on getting another quarterback. You're scared to want to draft a younger quarterback that may require a little bit of development because Bryce Young has been so bad for you that you might want to think twice about drafting one. And another bad situation that the Panthers are in right now is that you got a head coach in Dave Canales where this dude may be in over his head. You may have hired somebody that is probably the worst head coach in the NFL because somehow this team looks even worse this year than what they were last year under Frank Wright due to Dave Canales being limited in terms of the scheme and what kind of plays he can call due to Bryce Young not really being able to do anything. He doesn't have a good arm, so you can't call a lot of deep shots because he doesn't have the arm strength to get it there. So all you really can do is call a lot of RPOs and screen passes for Bryce Young, and that's not going to help you win a lot of games and get a lot of yards offensively with him in the game. So you got a head coach in Dave Canales that may be in over his head, plus he's also handicapped with what he has to deal with that quarterback due to Bryce Young not being that good. And that's why the Panthers are reluctant to flat out say that, yeah, Andy Dalton is definitively the better guy, and we're going to roll with him, and we're just going to give up on Bryce Young, because think about what this team gave up to get Bryce. You gave up DJ Moore, who's one of the best receivers in the NFL right now, and a ton of draft capital that you probably could have used on addressing another big issue that you have, which is on your defense right now. You got the worst defense in the NFL when it comes to performance and talent. Everybody wants to blame Ejaro Evero. You want to fire him, but what is that going to solve? This dude has no pieces to work with. Derek Brown's out. You also got a lot of other starters out. You lose a lot of pieces in free agency like Jeremy Chin, Frankie Louvu. You're basically telling Ejaro Evero to go out there and turn shit into gold pretty much. And with drafting Bryce Young, he just has completely nuked the Panthers franchise, because they're in the spot where there may not be any opportunity for them to climb themselves up out of this hole, at least for the next 3 to 4 years, because you're stuck, because you wasted the first overall pick on a guy who can adjust to the speed of the NFL. This dude doesn't look anywhere close to the player that he looked like when he was playing at the University of Alabama. And I know a lot of Panthers fans will say that Bryce Young wasn't good at Alabama neither. He was overrated, but the version of Bryce we saw at Alabama is not the version of Bryce that we've seen in the NFL. And when you give up so much draft capital, you've mortgaged so much of your future on one guy, and he pans out to be the worst quarterback ever to be drafted that high. You're pretty much in a situation where you may not be able to dig yourself up out of this hole, at least for the next couple of years. You can expect the Panthers to continuously be drafting high in the next couple of NFL drafts, similar to what you see with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars have constantly missed on quarterbacks. Although Trevor Lawrence is probably the best quarterback that they've had in recent memory, they still haven't gotten that far because they're not a good team when it comes to drafting. And when you continuously miss on the draft, especially at quarterback, you're always going to be drafting very highly. Look at the Cleveland Browns. Yeah, they hit on Baker Mayfield. They got rid of him, and they're right back where they started again, stage one, trying to find a new franchise quarterback, because they're going to most likely be picking top 3, top 5 in the draft next year. There is a consistent trend with teams that can't figure out the answer to the long-term quarterback woes. They always are consistently drafting high. And the Carolina Panthers, with the dysfunction that they have with their owner being somewhat of a Looney Tune, he has said that he's going to chill out. He's going to kind of take a little bit of a backseat, but we'll see about that. But getting Bryce Young just completely set back the Carolina Panthers franchise several years. And we could see a situation where the Panthers become the Detroit Pistons of the NFL. The Detroit Pistons, these dudes suck every single year. You probably can say they might also be the NFL's equivalent to not maybe the Detroit Pistons, but maybe the Charlotte Hornets, who are in the same location pretty much. So you got two franchises, and the Panthers and the Hornets, that just continuously miss on draft picks because they can't get the most important positions right in order to have success. And when you miss in the draft, like the Hornets and the Panthers have, it continuously sets back your franchise. And this is why the Panthers are in such a messed up situation with Bryce Young. Because when you missed on him, when you could have had CJ Stroud, you just nuked your franchise because you traded away Christian McCaffrey also. And that draft pick that you got in return for trading away CMC, you used to also trade up to get Bryce. So essentially, you trade away DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey, 2 first-rounders, and a few second-round picks to get a guy who is worse than Jamarcus Russell. Drafting Bryce Young, when you think about what the Panthers have to do to even be in position to take this dude, it has nuked this franchise.